Wyoming Territory, early October of 1879, the wind howled low across the plains as if carrying the weight of every secret the land had ever heard. Lettie Thurmond pulled the shawl tighter across her shoulders, one hand beneath her swollen belly, the other gripping the leather strap of her satchel. Her boots were caked in dry mud, the hem of her dress torn from days of walking. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. She was 8 months along and barely holding herself upright, but the light from the cabin window ahead pulled her forward like a promise. She had not eaten in nearly 2 days. The horse tied to the post was the first thing she saw, then the smoke from the chimney. Someone was home. She raised a trembling fist and knocked once on the weathered wooden door. Footsteps inside paused, then came closer. The door opened. The man who stood there looked like he had come straight from the land itself. Broad shoulders, sun-browned skin, dark blonde hair tousled like it had not seen a comb in days. His eyes were a deep gray blue, steady and unflinching. He looked like he had seen things, survived them too. He took her in her torn dress, her dirt-streaked face, the way her free hand cradled her stomach. "You never have to knock again," he said, voice low and sure, and stepped back to let her in. Lettie hesitated for half a second. She had not known kindness like that in a long time. Then her knees gave out. He caught her before she hit the floor. "Easy now," he murmured, lifting her like she weighed nothing. He brought her inside and set her gently on a cot near the fire. The warmth hit her skin like sunlight after weeks of cloud. She blinked up at him, lips too dry to form words. "I'm Vance Zeller," he said, crouching beside her. "Let's get you settled first. We will talk after." She nodded faintly. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away. He brought her water and bread. She sipped, then chewed slowly, like it was the first real food she had tasted in weeks. Maybe it was. He waited until she was steady enough to speak. "My name is Lettie Thurmond," she said softly. "I came from Cheyenne." Vance's eyes flicked to her belly, then back to her face. He did not ask the way others had. He did not look at her with judgment. "I was married," she went on. "He was a trapper, died in a river crossing 5 months ago. His name was Ezra." Vance nodded once. "I am sorry." She looked away. "His family said I was a burden. They sent me off with a few dollars and told me not to come back. I have no one." "You do now," he said simply. Lettie stared at him, unsure if she had heard right. He stood and went to the hearth, brought another blanket to drape over her legs. "This is my land, Lettie. I built this cabin after the war. It is quiet and far from town, but it is safe. You can rest here for as long as you need." She swallowed hard. "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone should have, long before now." She said nothing after that. Just stared at the fire while her body slowly stopped shaking. Vance moved around the cabin quietly, making tea, checking the windows. He did not press her with questions. That night, he gave her his bed and took the floor beside the stove. When she woke the next morning, the sun was just rising, casting gold across the wooden floor. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Vance sat at the table, a ledger open in front of him, pencil between his fingers. "Morning," he said, eyes lifting to hers. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said truthfully. "Like I can breathe again." He smiled a little. "Good. You need anything, you just say it. I have stock and supplies. Doctor comes by once a month if needed." She hesitated. "You live alone." "Always have," he said. "Since the war ended." She looked at his hands, strong, calloused, gentle. "You never married." "No, I never found someone who made it feel right." Their eyes held for a moment, something passing between them that neither of them named just yet. Over the next few days, Lettie found herself slowly relaxing. Vance never hovered, never asked more than she was willing to give. But he was always near, bringing her warm broth, helping her to the wash basin, fixing the porch steps when her weight made one creak too loud. She caught him watching her once, when she was brushing her hair near the fire. He looked away quickly, but she had seen the softness in his eyes. That night, as she lay in his bed, she whispered into the dark, "Thank you." From the floor, he said, "You do not owe me anything, Lettie." "I know," she said, "but I am still thankful." The day after that, the wind picked up hard. Vance spent the morning tying down the barn doors and checking the roof. Lettie was folding linens when her breath hitched. A sharp pain cut through her lower belly. She gripped the table. Vance was through the door in seconds. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. I think the baby is coming. His eyes widened just a little, but he nodded and moved fast. Sit, I will boil water. The labor was long and hard. Lettie gritted her teeth and bore down, sweat pouring from her brow, stomach clenching again and again. Vance stayed by her side, wiping her forehead, steadying her when she cried out. You are almost there, he said. She looked up at him, exhausted. I cannot. Yes, you can, he said, firmer now. You are stronger than you think. 3 hours later, a cry split the air. Lettie sobbed, laughing through the tears. Vance wrapped the baby in a clean cloth, his hands gentle. It is a girl. Lettie took her, holding her close to her chest. She is beautiful, he said softly. Lettie looked up at him, eyes full. Willow, she said. I will name her Willow. Vance smiled. Fits her. He stayed close that night. When he thought she was asleep, he reached over and touched the baby's tiny fingers. You both have a place here if you want it. Lettie did not open her eyes, just whispered, I do. He looked at her then, really looked. And if I wanted more than just to give you shelter, if I wanted to build something with you, she opened her eyes. Then I would not be alone anymore. You are not, he said. She smiled and reached for his hand. He took it. Held it like he never meant to let go. Vance stood by the woodpile, sleeves rolled, splitting logs with slow, deliberate swings. The air had turned sharper, the kind that made your breath show and your joints ache. Behind him, smoke curled from the chimney. He glanced back once toward the cabin and listened. Willow's cries hadn't come once that morning. Inside, Lettie moved carefully. Her body was still healing, and every motion felt as if it tugged at something deep within. But she'd insisted on washing the linens herself, folding them with one hand while the other cradled her daughter's weight in a sling across her chest. When Vance stepped through the door, he paused. Lettie stood by the window, her back to him, rocking gently on her heels as she hummed a tune too soft to catch. Willow stirred but didn't wake. The light caught the strands of Lettie's hair, unbraided and loose over her shoulders, and Vance found his chest tightening, unfamiliar and steady. Lettie turned. You didn't have to bring in more wood. There's still plenty near the hearth. There will be snow soon, he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. I'd rather not wait until the cold's already here. She nodded, then looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. She's feeding better. I think she's starting to know me. She knows you, he said. She settles when you speak. Lettie pressed her lips together. I wasn't sure I'd be enough for her. You are, she looked up, eyes searching his. Do you ever regret staying out here? Away from everything, Vance leaned against the table. At first I thought I'd go back east, then I started building. One board at a time, one fence post one day. Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about going back. But don't you get lonely? I did. For a long time, Lettie stepped closer. Willow shifted against her chest, then settled again. You never talk about your people. Not much to say, he said. My father died before I turned 16. My mother passed while I was still fighting. There's no one left I'd write to. She looked down. I'm sorry, he shook his head. That life feels like someone else's. She touched the edge of the table, fingers brushing the worn grain. Do you ever go into town? Only when I have to, supplies, or if someone's stock gets loose. Most folks know to leave me be. Lettie glanced toward the cradle beside the hearth. Do you think they'll leave me be too? Not everyone's like Ezra's people. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, when I was little, I used to think I'd live near the sea. I'd never seen it, but I'd heard stories. I wanted the kind of life where I could breathe salt air and never have to explain myself. You still can, her eyes met his. There's no sea in Wyoming, no, he said. But there's morning light and cattle lowing in the distance and someone to sit across from at supper. Lettie studied him. Is that what you want? I want you to feel like you belong somewhere, he said. If that starts here, I won't ask for more than you're ready to give. Willow stirred again, her mouth working in her sleep. Lettie reached to adjust her sling, hands practiced now. Vance watched her fingers move, steady and sure. I've never had anyone say anything like that to me, she said. Well, he replied, you won't have to wonder what I mean. That afternoon, as the sun tilted toward the hills, Lettie sat on the porch with Willow in her arms. Vance was near the corral, checking the fencing. He looked up once and caught sight of her. She raised a hand, shading her eyes. What's her name? He blinked. Who? That red roan you keep watching. She's not like the others. Maggie, he said. She came from a rancher up near Fort Laramie. Nearly broke her leg on the trail, but she pulled through. She lets you get close. She learned to trust. Lettie gave a small nod. Seems like the kind of thing that takes time. It does. The sky deepened to amber. Vance came back up toward the house, his steps slow. Lettie shifted Willow, careful not to wake her. "You'll need more hands come spring," she said. "I will. I can mend, and I know how to garden. My mother taught me before she passed. There's a patch of land behind the barn that stays damp enough for it." I saw. "It's good soil." He stopped at the edge of the porch. "Lettie," she looked up. "I've never had someone say they wanted to help." She smiled, tired but sure. "I'm not someone who takes and leaves, I know." The air cooled. Lettie stood, rocking Willow gently, and stepped inside. Vance followed. He set the kettle over the fire, and she lit the lantern. That night, they sat across from each other at the table, nothing between them but the quiet and the small sounds of the child sleeping in the cradle nearby. Vance didn't speak. He didn't need to. Lettie looked at him, and for the first time, the ache in her chest loosened. She was beginning to understand what it meant to be held, even without arms around her, and she wasn't alone anymore. The morning after the first frost, Vance found Lettie on her knees in the garden patch behind the barn, sleeves rolled and hands in the dirt. A wool shawl was wrapped firm around her shoulders, and Willow lay swaddled in a basket tucked under the porch eaves, shaded and warm with a folded quilt. Lettie's hair was tied up with a strip of muslin, and her breath puffed in front of her as she pulled the last of the withered stalks from the soil. "You're not even 4 weeks from birthing," Vance said, crouching beside her. "Earth'll still be here tomorrow." Lettie sat back on her heels, brushing soil from her palms. "I needed to feel useful today." He didn't argue. He reached out, plucked a tangled root from the ground, and tossed it aside. "You planning something for spring? Onions, beans, maybe squash if the ground holds water," she said. "I saw a dry creek just past the ridge. If we dug a channel, it might bring enough moisture down." Vance nodded once. "Could be done. Takes a fair bit of turning, but I've done it before." "I'd like to learn," she said, eyes steady on his. "Not just to plant, but to keep things going. I'll teach you," he said, "if you're sure." She looked toward the basket. "I want Willow to grow up knowing how to carry her own weight, but also knowing she doesn't have to do it alone." A quiet passed between them. Wind moved through the cottonwoods behind the barn, soft and rustling. Vance picked up the rake leaning against the fence and handed it to her. "Let me take the heavy work," he said. "You guide." She smiled, faint but easy, and took the handle. That afternoon, Vance hitched the wagon and drove them into town. Lettie wore a borrowed coat of his, sleeves rolled twice over, and Willow was tucked close against her chest. The trail was rutted in places, but the sky stayed clear and the horses calm. They reached the edge of town just past midday. Lettie's hands tensed around the wagon rail as the first buildings came into view. "You can wait in the wagon if you'd rather," Vance said. "No," she said. "I want to be seen," he nodded. "Then I'll walk with you." The general store sat at the end of the main road, its windows lined with jars and bolts of cloth. Inside, the bell above the door chimed as they entered. A man behind the counter looked up, jaw working a piece of straw. "Zeller," he said. "Didn't expect to see you till spring." "Needed supplies," Vance said. "And Lettie here needs fabric for swaddling." The man's eyes slid to her, then to the child resting against her. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Lettie met his stare without flinching. "I'll take muslin, whatever's cheapest, 3 yards, she said. "And if you've got vinegar, I'll need that too." The man nodded and turned away. Lettie exhaled slowly. "That went better than I thought." "They don't know you," Vance said. "They will over time." At the post office next door, a young boy offered to hold the door open. Lettie stepped past with a quiet thank you, and the boy ducked his head, cheeks red. By evening, they were back home. Lettie unpacked the parcels while Vance unhitched the wagon. She folded the cloth neatly, stacked the jars in the cupboard, and stood in the doorway watching the last light fade. "You're quiet," Vance said when he returned. She turned toward him. "I kept waiting for someone to say something cruel." "It's strange that no one did. Folks watch before they speak," he said, "and you stood firm." She nodded once. "I want to be clear about something, all right. I don't want charity, I want a life. One I can build with my own hands." Vance stepped closer, resting his hand against the doorframe beside her. You think that's all I'm offering? I don't know what you're offering, she said. Not fully. I'm offering to build something with you, he said, voice quiet. Whatever shape it takes, I won't force it, but I won't pretend I don't want it. Willow stirred in her cradle just then, a soft sigh and the twitch of fingers. Lettie looked at her daughter, then back at him. I'm not afraid of starting again, she said. But I won't do it halfway. His eyes didn't shift. Neither will I. Later, after Willow had been fed and settled, Lettie stepped out onto the porch. The sky was full of stars, the kind you only see far from town. Vance was sitting on the top step, elbows resting on his knees. She sat beside him, close but not touching. I didn't think I could feel like this again, she said. Like what? Like the ground under me might stay steady. He turned his head, studied her. You're not the only one rebuilding. She looked at him, saw the way the wind caught the hair at his temples, the quiet weight in his eyes. Then maybe we start from there, she said. He didn't answer with words, just reached out, slow and certain, and let his hand settle over hers. She didn't pull away. The river at the edge of the property hadn't frozen solid yet, but the banks were laced with frost, and the current moved sluggish beneath a skin of ice. Vance led the horses down for water, while Lettie stood at the edge of the trees with Willow tucked securely in her arms, bundled against the bite in the air. I've been thinking about the barn loft, she said when he returned, reins in one hand. It's warmer than I expected. If we cleared the dust and laid down a rug, it could make a good space for drying herbs, maybe even sewing. Vance tied the horses to the post and rubbed warmth into his hands. You planning to do more than garden come spring? I'd like to, she said. I used to help an older woman outside Rollins. She made tinctures and poultices, sold them to ranch wives and field hands. She said I had the right hands for it, steady, careful. He glanced at her fingers, red from cold but sure as they adjusted Willow's wrap. Sounds like something worth doing. I don't want to just live here, Lettie said, voice low. I want to belong to the land, to know it'll hold me back. Vance stepped beside her, keeping his voice just above the wind. I can show you the spots where the wild mint grows when the snow thaws. There's elderberry up the ridge if you know where to look. She gave a small nod, then turned her face toward the trees. I never learned the names of things, not properly, just what they were good for. That's enough, he said. Names'll come. They walked back to the cabin together, boots crunching over brittle grass. The sky was pale with thin clouds, and the sun hung low even though it wasn't yet midday. Inside, the warmth hit their cheeks, and Lettie gently laid Willow in the cradle, her breath already evening out into sleep. Vance pulled a chair near the fire and sat. Lettie didn't sit right away. She moved to the shelf where he kept his books, 3 in total, and ran her fingers along the spines. You read much, she asked. When I can, he said. Mostly in winter. She pulled one down, a worn copy of Marcus Clark's For the Term of His Natural Life, and opened to the title page. My mother taught me to read with the Psalms, she said. She said if I could find comfort in the words there, I'd never feel too far from home. You ever think about teaching Willow that? Not just the Psalms, Lettie said. I want her to know stories that show her what people survive, what they hold on to. I want her to know her mother lived through something and still opened her hands to more. Vance leaned back, watching the firelight curl in her hair. I think she'll see that without you saying a word. Lettie smiled faintly but didn't turn. Later that week, a snow came not heavy, but steady enough to soften the world in white. Vance brought the livestock in close, and Lettie boiled water on the stove for washing. When the wind picked up, she pressed rags into the window gaps to keep the draft out. Near dusk, the snow eased, and Vance came in, shaking flakes from his coat. Lettie was kneading dough at the table, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back in a way that left wisps at her temples. She sleeping? He asked. Like a stone, she said. He nodded toward the dough. That for biscuits. Bread, she said. I found yeast in the tin behind the flour. He moved to the stove, poured water from the kettle into a basin to thaw his hands. You ever think about what comes after winter? I do, she said. I think about what kind of place this could be if we kept building it together. Vance dried his hands on a cloth. You're not just talking about gardens and tinctures. No, she said. I'm not. He crossed the space between them, slow, deliberate. Her hands were still dusted with flour when he reached for them. I want to marry you, Lettie. he said. Not because you need shelter or because of the child, but because when I look at you, I see the life I stopped letting myself hope for, her breath caught, not from surprise but from the truth in it. I don't want to be beholden, she said. You won't be, you'll be chosen. Every day. She looked down at their hands, his calloused, hers chapped but graceful, and then up at him. Then yes, I want that. He brought her hands to his chest, held them there. They stood like that for a long time, the only sound the soft hiss of snow melting off the roof. Outside, the land rested beneath a blanket of white, quiet and waiting, but inside, something had taken root, sure and unshakable, like the first green shoot pressing through thawed soil. The snow held through November, blanketing the land in a hush that muffled even the sound of the creek outside the cabin. Days passed in quiet work, Lettie sewing by lamplight while Willow gurgled beside her, Vance carving dowels for a new crib frame he'd started piecing together in the barn. They hadn't spoken again of marriage since that night in the kitchen. They hadn't needed to. The promise already lived in the way Lettie reached for his hand when the wind howled hard against the shutters, or how Vance lingered at the door each morning before stepping out, one last glance to where she stood with the child on her hip. One night, as the fire burned low and Willow slept curled in a quilt-lined box by the stove, Lettie laid her mending aside and turned toward him. "Would you want it here?" she asked. He looked up from the leather strap he'd been oiling. "What's that?" "The wedding." "If we're to have one," he set the strap down gently. "I would, but only if you do." "I don't want a preacher I've never met or a church where I'm looked at sideways," she said. "But I'd like something honest, simple. Something we make with our own hands." Vance leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We could do it right here. I know a man over in Granite Creek, justice of the peace. He's fair." She nodded, eyes steady. "2 witnesses. There's a couple down near the cattle trail. Been neighbors in all but name since I built this place. They'd come." "Then I'd like that," she said, Vance's mouth curved, gentle and sure. "I'll ride out tomorrow." The ceremony came 4 days later, on a windless morning when the sky stretched pale and wide over the frozen grass. Lettie wore a dress she had let out at the seams and stitched with new cuffs. She'd hemmed a strip of lace from her mother's old apron and pinned it to her collar. Vance had shaved close and wore his cleanest shirt, the one with the mended cuff she'd sewn for him a week after Willow was born. They stood on the porch, breath visible in the air, with the justice reading words neither of them had practiced, but both knew in their bones. The neighbors stood beside them, an older woman with a lined face and a man who nodded often but said little. Willow, swaddled in Lettie's arms, let out a single protesting chirp and then fell quiet again. When the words were done and their hands joined, Vance looked at Lettie as though there was nothing else he'd ever needed to see. She hadn't cried, not until he kissed her, soft and steady, and she felt the weight of all the miles she'd walked to get here fall away. Afterward, they shared bread and venison stew around the fire. The neighbors left before dusk, offering blessings and a small jar of honey from their own hive. Lettie set it on the shelf beside the tea tin, hands lingering on the lid. That night, Vance banked the fire while she set Willow down in the new crib he'd finished just that morning. She ran her fingers once along the smooth rail. "She'll outgrow it before summer," she said. "Then I'll build another," he replied. They stood side by side, looking down at their daughter. Her breath came soft, and even one fist curled beneath her chin. Lettie touched his arm. "I never thought it could feel like this. Like I'm not reaching for something anymore." "You're not," he said, turning to her. "You're home." She stepped into him, hands slipping beneath the edge of his coat. He held her close, steadying her like he always had, and she leaned into him with all the quiet trust she now carried. They didn't speak much that night. They didn't need to. Winter deepened, but it didn't feel long. Lettie began drying herbs along the back wall of the loft, tying them in neat bundles and labeling them in tidy script. Vance taught her how to follow the tracks of elk across the snow and how to read the clouds before a storm. They mended fencing together, watched for signs of thaw, and planned which seeds to order from the catalog that came by post once each month. By the time the ice broke on the creek, Willow was sitting up in the grass, reaching with both hands toward the sunbeam falling across the yard. Lettie laughed when she toppled forward, caught only by the folds of her linen dress. Vance caught the moment without needing a word, kneeling beside them and brushing a curl from Willow's brow. "First time she's grabbed a flower," Lettie said, holding up the crushed crocus in the child's fist. "She's got your grip," he said. They spent that evening in the garden, Lettie planting onions in neat rows while Vance turned the soil for beans. Willow napped beneath the shade of the wagon, a clean cloth pinned above her to keep the sun off. When the work was done, they sat on the porch with their boots off, feet bare against the warm boards. Lettie leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed. "I used to think survival was the best I could ask for," she said. "Now I know peace is something different. It's what you build when you stop running," he said, resting his hand over hers. She turned her face toward him, still leaning close. "I'm not afraid of staying. Then we've got everything we need." And they did. The cabin stood through every season that came after. Lettie's herbs hung in orderly rows, her remedies passed hand to hand among women on the prairie. Vance's fences held strong through every wind that tried them, and the horses never lacked for care. Willow grew tall and sure, her feet firm in the soil where her parents had built everything with care and sweat, and the kind of love that never had to be spoken to be known. They slept in the same bed each night, hands touching under every quilted cover, and no matter how late Vance came in from the fields or how many hours Lettie spent at the table mixing tinctures, they always found one another before the fire burned out. And from that quiet, honest place, they lived the rest of their lives together.